So, pretty much this is kind of a follow-up of what I talked about a little bit when I was doing my Maleficent trailer. My thoughts on the Maleficent trailer. Is basically talking about villains with a sympathetic backstory. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of villains out there that have sympathetic backstories, and they're great and they make sense. As you can see right here from this picture, Mr. Freeze is the capital thing of sympathetic villains, along with like Two-Face and several other villains. But however, I don't, like I said in my video, in that previous video, I don't need a sympathetic story for every single villain, you know? I don't need a story where, you know, oh, he's such a bad guy, but he didn't start out that way, he was really good. Now, like I said, I'm keeping an open mind on the whole sympathetic backstory for Maleficent, you know, being the Queen of Evil, I thought she'd be evil from the get-go. And probably that's not the case, but hey, it's Paul Dini writing the script, so I'll be interested. Anywho, like I said, this is a stories like these where and don't get me wrong, I love sympathetic villains sometimes. Sometimes they're really cool. When you look at these villains and you want them to succeed, but you know they can't win because their repercussions will be terrible, and you want to see them succeed, but the other time you want to see Batman or Superman or what other supervillain or superheroes out there want to beat them. You know, Marvel villains. We've got sympathetic villains like Sandman and the Lizard, and well, Lizard because it's Kurt Connors trapped in that monster's body. But yeah, you can also feel some sympathy for Otto Octavius. You know, he had a real. For those who know Otto Octavius, he had a real shit life, and he pretty much, you know, life kind of molded him into Dr. Octopus. A good example of this is, like, go read Zeb Wells' Spider-Man Dr. Octopus Year 1. That's a great example of that. It's a great story for Dr. Octopus. But anyway, I digress. Anyway, but here's the thing. I don't want that for every single villain. You know, sometimes I like villains that are just bad for the sake of being bad. Sometimes I just like my villains being evil, you know? I don't want to know, like in, here's the thing. In Joker's Villain Month issue, they basically talked about how Joker had an abusive childhood, and that kind of molded him the way he was. And I'm like, don't give me that origin! Don't give me the sympathetic crap! What I'm really hoping is that that's one of Joker's multiple choice origins. Hopefully that's not the official canon origin. But like I said, sometimes I like my villains just to be evil. It's kind of like how with villains like the My Little Pony villains, like most fan fiction stories that are centered around the villains, they have a sympathetic backstory, like, oh, he's evil because such and such, Discord's evil for these reasons, or Sombra's evil for these reasons. You see, when I did that audio drama with Sombra with Milan Jeftik on his channel, you guys can go back, and it's called My Little Pony: A Somber Tale, and we are doing a trilogy on it, and the sequel will be coming out probably next month or early next year. So I don't want to toot my own horn, just throwing that out there. But, you know, when I wrote that, I had the mind of making Sombra a prick from before he was turned into Sombra. I wanted to get the thing across that he was a vain, cruel, and kind of a prick. So I didn't want him to be like that. Now, sometimes the whole sympathetic backstory when it comes to fanfiction, especially when it comes to cartoon fanfiction, you know, sometimes it works and other times it really doesn't. Especially, what really grinds my gears is when, you know, oh, they're evil because this character broke their heart or something like that. That just kind of irks me. I'm like, really? You got so jaded on that? You decided to blow up the world? Really? And sometimes even when that's the case for villains in actual cartoons or comics or something like that, where sometimes I'll be like, really? You got spurred by a girl and you got pissed off over that? To blow up a planet? Oh, alright. You can't blame Mr. Freeze because he's trying to save the woman he loves. At least, you know, pre-52 Freeze, not not nude 52 Freeze. Now, like I said, sympathetic backstory can work, but I don't need that for every single villain. Like, do I need a sympathetic backstory for Mum-Ra, the ever-living Lord of Evil? No. If they just said, hey, he was an asshole from the get-go, I'm totally fine with it, because you know what? When I look at Mum-Ra, there is at no point where I say, I wonder what his childhood was like. I'm always like, no, fuck that. I know this guy was bad from the start. And that's kind of the thing, let's look at Megatron's origin real quick. Megatron, depending on the IDW comics, and they've kind of used this in the TV shows now, especially with Prime, is that Megatron was kind of like a like an idealist. And he pretty much rallied behind a lot of people that would later be a lot of Transformers that would become the Decepticons, and he even had Orion Pax on his side, who would later become Optimus. And then when he talks to the Council of Primes, he reveals, hey, you know what? I want to be the new Prime. Let me take over. And it starts with good intentions, but you kind of see, especially in the Transformers Megatron Origins comic, I think that's, if I remember right, that's what it's called. You start to see, even from the get-go, that Megatron was never really into practice what he preached, all about, equality and all that. You could clearly see from the get-go that it was always peace through power, or peace through tyranny, excuse me. And I'm totally cool with that, because that's something you could see the Megatron we knew before he became the Lord of the Decepticons, to do something like that. So, that's the thing, I like a good balance of these sympathetic villains mixed with villains that you just love to see them just for being evil. I mean, Azula, let's look at Azula real quick. Azula is kind of not really sympathetic because her mother didn't love her, but she thought that. She was always mentally ill, she was always crazy. Azula was always insane because, she never got her mother's love. But on the other hand, you kind of get that she didn't want it. That was Azula got what she always wanted, and one thing she never got was her mother's love, and that kind of drove her nuts because she was, at a young age, she was so used to getting what she wanted. So that, you could clearly see that she only wanted Ursa's love on the sole ground of just wanting it for the sake of having it. You see where I'm going with this? Is that Azula was not really sympathetic so much as she was psychotic. At least that's always been how I looked at it. It's also kind of like with the Power Ranger villains, at least for the majority of the Power Ranger villains. A lot of them are just evil for just being evil. They don't care about, I had such a bad childhood, or this person betrayed me, or I once loved this person. No, they just blow shit up. Now, granted, they do have some other villains in here, like we have Ecliptor and Astronema, who, have different viewpoints. And that's all good, but I'm talking about 85% of Power Rangers villains are just there to wreck shit, and that is it. But anywho, I feel like I'm just kind of running my mouth at this point of just kind of going over the same thing over and over again. So I'm just going to leave it up to you guys. What do you guys think? Do you guys like would you guys like more sympathetic villains, or do you guys just like sympathetic villains in general, or do you guys like a balance of just villains for the sake of villainy, or sympathetic villains? Alright guys, I'm out.